Bowling Green, Kentucky, where news is breaking now on Fox News Channel on Senator Rand Paul after he was attacked in his front yard by his longtime neighbor, according to authorities. Sources now tell Fox News the senator has been told to expect federal charges to be filed in this case, meaning prosecutors may believe the attack was politically motivated. Details first on Fox just ahead. Also breaking now, the New York Times reports the comedian Louis C.K. is facing accusations by 5 different women that he committed sexual misconduct with them. The brand new details coming in. And breaking now from the Washington Post, Alabama's Judge Roy Moore facing sexual assault allegations from 1 woman and similar claims from 3 others, all from a time when they were teenagers. Now the Alabama Senate candidate is facing growing opposition and responding, as are Republican leaders. And we're waiting to hear from the head of the Air Force about the gunman in the Texas church massacre. The military admitting it did not tell the feds about the killer's conviction for attacking his wife and breaking her baby's skull. That could have kept him from legally buying guns before he murdered 25 innocent people, including a pregnant woman. We'll bring you the briefing live. And President Trump in Beijing giving great credit to China, the country he once accused of raping the United States. The president now says he blames Americans, not the Chinese. And there's word airport screeners failed to find more than 70% of guns, knives, and explosives in an undercover operation. Those weapons, luckily, were fake. So what are they doing to try to catch the real ones? News is breaking now. Let's get to it.
Breaking news. Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
Wow, what a day. We begin with a bombshell report. Involving the Republican nominee for Alabama. Alabama's Senate seat. Accusations today that Roy Moore initiated a sexual encounter with teenagers. Each says Moore was in his 30s, and the women between 16 and 18 years old. Roy Moore's campaign officials say the allegations are not true. They're accusing the Washington Post of playing politics. In a statement they write, Judge Roy Moore has endured the most outlandish attacks on any candidate in the modern political arena, but this story in today's Washington Post alleging sexual impropriety takes the cake. National liberal organizations know their chosen candidate, Doug Jones, is in a death spiral, and this is their last-ditch Hail Mary. The Washington Post has already endorsed the judge's opponent, and for months, the Post has been engaged in a systematic campaign to distort the truth about the judge's record, his career, and derail his campaign. As I reported, the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, now says that Roy Moore should quit the Senate race if the accusations are true. But another prominent Republican, Senator John McCain, wants Moore gone now. Quoting, "The allegations against Roy Moore are deeply disturbing and disqualifying. He should immediately step aside and allow the people of Alabama to elect a candidate they can be proud of." The news is breaking now, and Peter Ducey's on it live on Capitol Hill. Peter?
Shet, this accuser, who was 14 at the time and 53 years old now, is named Lee Korfman, and she says that Moore undressed and started inappropriately touching her and also tried to get her to touch him inappropriately. She also does accuse him of kissing her, but insists there was never any sexual intercourse. Still, the More campaign is calling this story, which is apparently from the late 70s, false, and they do suggest that it's only coming out now to help the Democrat in this race, Doug Jones. Part of their statement says this garbage is the very definition of fake news and intentional defamation. We have called a few phone numbers the Fox Brain Room says belong to the accuser here, Lee Korfman, but we have not been able to get in touch with her yet. Shep.
What else are we hearing from lawmakers this afternoon, Peter?
Nobody is defending Roy Moore in the Republican Party, Shep, on the Senate side. We do have some brand new sound, just a few minutes old, from Alabama's other senator, Richard Shelby, as well as Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, and they're basically saying that he should stop running if any part of this is true.
I don't know. It's a devastating, nasty story. If the revelations, if that's true, I don't believe there'd be any place for him in the U.S. Senate.
No. If there's any shred of truth, he ought to step aside immediately.
There are more than a dozen Republican senators now who say that Moore should step aside if these allegations are true. It seems like the list is getting longer by the minute. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, is among them. But remember, Moore ran his race in the primary and won on an anti-McConnell platform. And Moore still is likely going to be on the ballot, even if he was to step aside, because state law says no new ballots printed within 76 days of the election. If they were printed, Luther Strange's name can't go on it because he already lost this year, but he could theoretically be written in by voters. It's still early to tell, though, if that's something that's going to happen, Shep.
Just beginning. Peter Ducey in our Washington newsroom. Thank you. Breaking news now on Fox News Channel. 5 women have told the New York Times newspaper that the comedian Louis C.K. crossed the line into sexual misconduct. This story breaking in the last 15 minutes. The New York Times reports the encounters happened more than a decade ago. When asked for comment, Louis C.K.'s publicist told the Times he is not going to answer any questions, and that's a quote. The distribution company behind his new movie canceled its premiere just hours before it was set to happen today. Louis C.K. also canceled an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert on CBS. That news breaking now. More details as they come. Also breaking, the leader of the United States Air Force speaking from the Pentagon now, and they're talking about the suspect in the Texas church shooting. He was able to buy guns because the Air Force failed to report his violent history. The military convicted the suspect of assaulting his wife and cracking his stepson's skull. He spent a year in prison and got a bad conduct discharge. Under Pentagon rules, the Air Force should have told the FBI so his conviction would come up on background checks, disallowing him to buy a gun. It could have prevented the suspect from legally purchasing guns and ammunition before he murdered 25 people, including a pregnant woman at a Sunday service. Officials say they planned his State of the Air Force news conference before that shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Let's listen in.
Few of the things that we had intended to share with you here when we initially planned this press availability, and then after we do that, we'll just open it up for any questions that you may have. With respect to the priorities for the Air Force, our biggest need right now is for a higher and stable budget to provide security and solvency for the nation. The fiscal year 18 continuing resolution is actually delaying our efforts to increase the readiness of the force, and risk accumulates over time, and you just don't know exactly when things will break. But we are stretching the force.
They've moved on to another topic now, but in just a moment, our producers have informed us they will be taking questions about the suspect in this case. Jennifer Griffin's been following this closely for us. She's our national security correspondent and live at the Pentagon. Jennifer?
Shepard, the Pentagon has known it had a problem for nearly 2 decades with not reporting military crimes to the FBI. There was a Department of Defense Inspector General report going all the way back to 1997 that dealt with this very issue and found that military crimes were not being reported by the various military services to the FBI's National Criminal Background Check database. As recently as 2 years ago, the fingerprints of hundreds of convicted offenders had not been submitted by the various military services. The FBI database had only one entry from the Pentagon for for a domestic violence conviction as of December 31st, according to U.S. officials, and had none from other federal agencies. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis has ordered the Inspector General to, quote, define what the problem is, but I think they did so in 1997. Now Congress is getting involved, and Senator John Cornyn of Texas is crafting legislation to require the Pentagon to swiftly report military criminal history to the FBI database. The shooter had 7 incidents of domestic violence in Texas between 2011 and 2012. 5 were withdrawn as part of a plea agreement with the Air Force, Shep.
Jennifer, you have more info about how widespread this problem is throughout the military?
In fact, that 1997 Pentagon Inspector General report found, quote, widespread lapses among all of the military services. We now know in more than 80% of criminal cases involving the Army and Navy, fingerprint cards were not submitted to the FBI database. And according to that 1997 investigation, the Navy failed to report its criminal cases to the FBI 94% of the time, the Army 79% of the time, and the Air Force 50% of the time, putting it ironically ahead of the other services. Quote, the lack of reporting to the FBI criminal history files prevents civilian law enforcement agencies from having significant information on military offenders. That is from 20 years ago from that IG report, Shep. Expect hard questions of the Air Force Chief General David Goldfein and Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson just moments from now. That press conference has just started.
Jennifer, thank you. And when they go to the question and answer period, we'll take our viewers back there live. The feds might have lost valuable time trying to get information from the Texas shooter's phone, simply because they haven't been able to unlock the thing. Apple executives told Fox News this morning that the FBI has not reached out to the company for assistance in unlocking an iPhone belonging to the killer. In fact, the authorities haven't even confirmed publicly that it is an iPhone. Matt Finn with the news. He's live Sutherland Springs, Texas. What are you hearing about this phone?
Shepard, Apple tells Fox News that it reached out to the FBI to see if the dead shooter's phone was indeed an iPhone, and that the FBI tells Apple that it is an iPhone. Apple goes on to say that the FBI, though, did not ask Apple for help in unlocking it, and that there is a critical 48-hour window in which Apple says it can assist authorities to unlock a dead person's iPhone, and now that 48-hour window has passed. It sounds grim, but one way that can be done is holding up a dead person's finger to their iPhone to unlock it. That can only be done in the first 48 hours, and now that critical window has passed. Now, in an unrelated event, an FBI director said this morning that this is a growing problem with authorities trying to unlock dead people's cell phones. Here's what the FBI director had to say.
Whether it's gangs, homicides, car accidents, civil disputes, we are unable to access many of these devices. And there's a challenge in explaining that because the Bureau looks like, hey, we want access to everything. That's obviously not what we are arguing.
The Southern Baptist Convention also tells Fox News that Pastor Pomeroy of the First Baptist Church here in Sutherland Springs expressed to the president and leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention that he would like the church to be demolished, saying it's a very painful setting. The Southern Baptist Convention says ultimately the pastor and the church will have the final decision if the church behind me would be demolished. Shep.
Matt Finn on scene. Matt, thank you. Coming up, breaking new details on the assault on Senator Rand Paul. Fox News has learned that the senator has been told to expect further charges against the man accused of attacking him, breaking 6 ribs, and leaving him with cuts on his face and water on his lungs. Was the attack politically motivated? The breaking news is first on Fox and next from the Fox News deck. News now on Fox News Channel. Senator Rand Paul has been told to expect federal charges to be filed against the man accused of attacking him while he was mowing his front lawn. That's what multiple sources inside Senator Paul's office tell Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. He says that indicates that prosecutors believe politics motivated the attack. That's what would make it federal. A senior advisor to the Kentucky senator says he had not talked to the suspect in years before the man, quote, vigorously assaulted him. He also disputed reports that the senator was involved in a long-standing dispute with his neighbor, saying the first conversation with the attacker came after Senator Paul's ribs were broken. This was not a fight. It was a blindside, violent attack by a disturbed person. The suspect is Rene Boucher. He pleaded not guilty in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in court today, about 100 miles south and west of Louisville. Prosecutors there say they may change the misdemeanor charges because of how severe Rand Paul's injuries are. But so far, no changes. The senator says he has 6 broken ribs and water on the lungs. It's been back and forth between the two parties today. The suspect's lawyer saying this was all about lawn maintenance. His neighbors, many of his neighbors, say that is ridiculous. And Rand Paul has been out with some interesting tweets today, suggesting that was not the case at all. And now word from his office that they should expect federal charges against the accused attacker. Trace Gallagher with the rest of the story live for us. Trace?
Shep, we know Dr. Rene Boucher is a 59-year-old retired anesthesiologist who has lived next to Rand Paul for 17 years. Even though Boucher pleaded not guilty, as you said, the arrest warrant from Kentucky State Police says that Boucher admitted going onto Paul's property and tackling him. At the time, Rand Paul was doing yard work and was wearing earplugs. The New York Times reported the dispute was over lawn clippings being blown onto Boucher's property, but Senator Rand Paul has not issued any comment, though he did tweet 2 articles, one from Breitbart, the other from the Washington Examiner, that say the landscaping dispute is fake news. In fact, the Washington Examiner spoke with several neighbors, including one who said, and I'm quoting here, "The stories of a landscaping dispute or a dispute of any sort between Rand Paul and Rene Boucher are erroneous and unfounded. The reason for Mr. Boucher's bizarre attack is known only to him. Several other neighbors back that up." On the flip side, the developer of the neighborhood says Boucher is an almost perfect neighbor. Rand Paul is a different story. Shep.
Trace, it's beginning to sound like there's even more evidence this may have been politically motivated.
Yeah, there is. Even though Dr. Boucher's attorney says it has absolutely nothing to do with either's politics or political agenda, turns out Boucher is a Democrat and, according to the Washington Times, was aggressively anti-Trump and anti-GOP on his social media, even calling for the impeachment of Trump and urging special counsel Robert Mueller to, quote, fry Trump's private parts. The former doctor was also apparently a fan of the Never Trump movement. Some neighbors also say this should not be called an altercation, considering Rand Paul was ambushed by his neighbor. The severity, as you said, of the injuries could lead to more charges, including federal charges, Shep, for attacking a politician.
You know, I've gone back and looked, and it now appears that the only one who was making this lawn narrative, this landscaping narrative alive was the lawyer for the suspect. We haven't officially heard that from anyone in Rand Paul's team. Never.
Nobody at all. In fact, the developer is the one that kind of brought that up, and now the neighbors are saying that is not the case at all. We have not heard that from Rand Paul's team. We have not heard that now from anybody else except for the lawyer for Boucher.
Yep, we've reached out to Rand Paul himself and have not been had calls returned. Updates as we get them, but there's breaking news, and the Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff are answering questions from reporters regarding the gunman in the Texas church shooting. Let's listen.
Just out, and of course, it's still pending legislation. There's no final vote, but we haven't gone through the whole bill. I think it's like 1,500 pages total. So I think we're kind of hoping that we don't get it before the 3-day weekend entirely, as we'll have a lot of people spending their weekend reading. But I think everyone agrees that space needs to be integrated, normalized as part of a joint warfighting effort. This year's budget increases, the FY18 budget proposal increases what the Air Force is proposing to spend on space by 20%, and we are shifting to space as a warfighting domain. Last week we were in Colorado out and visited again the National Space Defense Center. Just in the 6 months that I've been on the job, went there once very shortly after I was confirmed and was just there again last week, and the advances are significant. Chief, do you want to?
Yeah, I would just offer that, Secretary Mattis has been actually very clear in his guidance to all the services that we are to go look at how do we increase lethality and readiness. And when I opened with talking about owning the ultimate high ground, the nation expects its Air Force to own the high ground, the ultimate high ground, and achieve space superiority, which is like air superiority, freedom from attack and freedom to maneuver. And so as we transition from a benign domain from which we monitor and report to a warfighting domain, this is a significant shift that we're leading as we go forward. Because as a service, we organize, train, and equip and present ready forces to combatant commanders. And so as the Secretary said, normalizing space as a warfighting domain means we integrate all those capabilities and tried and true principles of joint warfighting in this domain as we go forward. The National Defense Space Center is a huge part of that. The Secretary and I also spent an entire day with all the 4-star and 3-star leadership of the Air Force doing a full day tabletop exercise on warfighting in space. So we're moving forward.
The legislation would take certain authorities away from the Air Force, the PDSA, the A-11, and it would put the warfighting ConOps development under STRATCOM. Are you concerned about the authorities moving outside of the service?
Well, actually, there's a lot of things in that language that's conditional and a lot of caveats in there, and I think we want to look at the language really carefully.
Well, they've moved on to other topics clearly, but the headline from this briefing is they've come together to say that leaders at the Pentagon in Washington did not have any idea of the shooter in Texas's background because of the error that was made in the chain. And the moment they became aware at the Pentagon, according to their reporting a few moments ago, they put that word out to the public. Further, they went on to apologize to the victims and the victims' relatives and loved ones for what's happened, and they're vowing to get to the bottom of it. Let's bring in Michael Farkas, a criminal and military law attorney. He represents both current and former service members. This seems extremely serious and, quite frankly, horrifying.
It is, Shep, and I wish I could say that this was an isolated occurrence, but in a very large bureaucracy where there are many, many steps and many, many people involved, unfortunately, errors do happen, and I think the Air Force Secretary will be agreeing that a lot of improvement has to happen.
More on the breaking news on the attack in Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. As I've been reporting, sources inside the senator's office tell our Judge Andrew Napolitano that Senator Paul has been told to expect federal charges against the suspect. Judge Napolitano, in a conversation downstairs a few minutes ago, told me this points to one thing, that is that this was politically motivated. Do you agree?
Well, if they're considering federal charges, that obviously goes way beyond a simple state assault charge. He's currently charged with what appears to be kind of a low-level assault.
Misdemeanor for assault.
Right, but I would bet if it remains at the state level with broken ribs and water in the lungs, it may very well be elevated to a felony and go to the county attorney. But that aside, if they're looking at federal charges, it sounds like this was politically motivated.
We had the initial police report indicated that there was a delayed reporting, meaning the assault happened, he went inside, called the police came, and he reported, I have this pain. But he didn't know he had broken ribs at the time, and that's why they put a misdemeanor assault 4 on him, which is a very low level, $7,500 bond. But they said if it turns out the injuries are worse, we'll change the charges. And then nothing happened. This kind of makes all of that make sense in a way that it didn't before.
No, it does. It's obviously being vigorously investigated. You can read into a little bit about what comments are coming out of Senator Paul's office as well. He's really not going along with this is a no big deal story.
No, he said indeed that what they're saying isn't true. This was not about lawn maintenance. The lawn narrative is shattered.
Right. So if there is some kind of connection, if it was in, I think the official language of this statute is on account of the performance of his official duties, and that really could mean a whole host of things, right? This person might be looking at a maximum 20-year count under federal law.
Well, we'll wait for it to play out. Again, we would love to hear from Senator Paul on this matter. He has not spoken to anyone as far as we know, and this news is new on Fox News in this hour. Expect more throughout the day. The breaking news in the White House Ways and Means Committee has just approved the Republican tax plan. Ways and Means says yes, and we might soon learn what's in it now that it's been approved. This comes as Senate Republicans release their own tax rewrite, and it's different. Changes are abound. He meant to say. It's the bottom of the hour coming up, top of the news. Stay with us.
I'm Leah Gabriel with the Fox Report and more of today's headlines. A dramatic takedown with a rubber bullet caught on camera. According to cops in Long Beach, California, the suspect led them on a chase after he fought with an officer and stole his gun during a traffic stop. He then stole a woman's car. And a manhunt underway in Tennessee where investigators say they are looking for an armed and dangerous murder suspect who broke out of jail with 2 other inmates. Happened about 60 miles north and east of Nashville. Investigators say the inmates escaped by removing a speaker in a wall and then crawling through the hole. And ISIS fighters have evacuated their last stronghold in Syria. That's the word from the Russian-backed Syrian regime, which declared victory in the town near the Iraq border. Militants are now apparently scattered in small towns and villages in the desert. The news continues with Shepard.
Breaking news now on Fox News Channel. The House Ways and Means panel has voted the Republican tax bill out of committee. This measure is set to go to the House Rules Committee next week, and if things go according to their plan, the bill would head to the House floor after that. A Senate committee has also released some of the details about its version of this tax bill, and there is a big shift in the House bill now. It would delay the corporate tax cut to 20% until the year 2019. That's breaking, and they're speaking about it now. Let's listen.
Proposal that is forward-leaning. This is a tax proposal that is aspirational. This is a tax proposal that invites Americans to say, you know what? I'm ready for prosperity. I'm ready for opportunity. And I'm ready for a bright future. This is an important step today. Our next steps will be to fully engage other members of the House of Representatives. But there is a spring in our step as we think about this great debate, because we've got one of 2 choices. We can either defend the status quo, and you heard some defense of the status quo earlier on.
What we'd actually like to hear is the details, and since we're not getting them from this cheering squad, let's go to our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel. There are changes and notable ones today, yes?
Well, that's right, Shep. Yeah, they did a 29-page amendment that Chairman Kevin Brady offered this afternoon. It would do some things that were popular with Republicans to make sure they got that 24-16 vote to pass it out of the Ways and Means Committee. For example, preserving the adoption tax credit. It will also lower the rate for small businesses from 15% to 9%. Chairman Brady talked about his changes a short time ago.
For the past several days, we've had numerous discussions on many of these same priorities. These are areas where members on both sides of the aisle said we need to take a second look. We did. And now I'm offering this amendment on behalf of our committee to put them in the bill.
It had enough support along party lines. Next step, it should go to the House floor. A lot of wrestling to go through before that, but should go to the House floor by the end of next week, Shep.
What do you know about the Senate's plan?
Well, the Senate plan is being rolled out just this hour, and it's definitely different than the House proposal. Let's take a look at some of the key points. The Senate would maintain 7 tax brackets ranging from 10% to 38.5%. It would totally scrap local and state tax deductions, which are popular in high-tax states. It would permit mortgage deductions up to $1 million, and it would reduce the corporate rate to 20%. But it would hold off and wait until 2019. Senators are still reviewing it. The House's top Democrat is accusing the GOP of rushing.
Why don't we do it where there's the least opportunity for people to review it? Let's do it very fast, very fast. Speed of light in the dark of night and back rooms without even their own members.
There will be plenty more argument up here on Capitol Hill now, with 2 tax reform plans being unveiled and shown to the public. Shep.
Mike Emanuel on the Hill. Thanks. For more on the GOP plan and how it could affect you, let's bring in Fox Business Network's Jerry Willis. What do you see?
Well, so there's a lot going on. There's the Senate version. I wanted to get some numbers first in here and how this impacts, you know, middle-class folks, because there's more information on that today, and I think you should know. The Republicans have been saying all along that family of 4 earning $59,000 would get a tax reduction of $1,182. You've heard that a number of times, right? Well, guess what? When you work that out over the 10-year span of this bill, at the end of that period, that same family would get a tax increase on today's tax policy of $500. So there's actually baked into this tax increases at the back end for middle class folks. And I have to tell you, I just want to show you a list of some of the deductions that are going away or being, just reduced dramatically. Mortgage interest, student loan tuition, the medical expenses is a big thing for people who have huge medical problems. You can write off medical expenses up to 7.5% of income. It's a big deal. And yesterday, of course, we talked about student loan interest, tuition expense. A lot of this stuff is out of the House version, and of course the Senate upping the ante today on the SALT, state and local income tax, saying you can't deduct any of that under their plan.
So what you're saying is, for middle-class Americans, a lot of people will actually see a tax increase from this.
It depends on who you are, what your deductions are, how big your family is, where you live in particular. Are you in a blue state? New Jersey, New York, California, anybody with high local taxes, you're likely to see some kind of tax increase here.
But there are lots of tax breaks for the rich.
Well, there are lots of tax breaks for the rich, and it's really unclear. I think right now you're going to see some tax increases for wealthy people. But I have to tell you, we've been sold that this thing is a huge middle class tax break. I think that's true, but only to a point. And for a lot of people, certainly if this went into law, at the end of that 10-year period, which this law goes for, you're going to see increases for some people.
The Dow is off significantly today. The NASDAQ off even more significantly percentage-wise. How much is this about the tax uncertainty?
Everything about taxes. So our own Maria Bartiromo talking to Steve Mnuchin, that is the Treasury Secretary. He knows a thing or two about taxes, and in part behind this, he said that they cannot sign on to immediately reduce those corporate taxes to 20%. May not happen for a year. So that raises all kinds of questions. Will it ever happen? If the Republicans were to lose control of one house or both houses, could they even get it through? So you saw the big sell-off. It was 180 points down from the level at the open. This was a big change. We've rallied back here some, but you can tell that the market's really focused on these taxes, these corporate taxes in particular. Some of this was baked in. A lot of people were buying stocks in part because they thought they were going to get some kind of corporate tax benefit, right? But, when they got the news today from Mnuchin, maybe not, you saw what happened.
Jerry, thank you.
You're welcome.
President Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, is said to be worried that the special counsel Robert Mueller could target Flynn's son in the Russia investigation. That's what our Catherine Herridge is reporting. Michael Flynn Jr. served in his father's chief of staff and worked for his dad's lobbying firm. Investigators say Flynn Jr. traveled with his father to Moscow in December of 2015. That's when Flynn Sr. sat next to the Russian President Vladimir Putin at a black-tie dinner for the Kremlin's propaganda outlet RT television network. NBC News reported earlier this week that Mueller had enough evidence to file charges in the Flynn investigation and his son. Fox News confirms Mueller's team is looking at Flynn Sr. for failing to register as a foreign agent when he was lobbying for Turkey. Also, accusations he talked about a plot to kidnap a Turkish cleric living in Pennsylvania. Flynn has denied that. Flynn Jr. commented about the ongoing federal investigation a few days ago, tweeting that he does not think he'll go to jail. Josh Gerstein is here, senior reporter for Politico. What do they have on Michael Flynn Jr.?
Well, I think the idea, Shep, is that it comes from the same involvement of him being side by side with his father in a lot of these activities. And there are questions, I think, about statements that were given either as part of background checks, because remember there was a story at one point that the father had sought some kind of security clearance, or at least requested a security clearance for his son. And then the question will be whether they were entirely candid in their dealings with the Justice Department about this question of whether they should be registered as foreign agents.
Memorably, Michael Flynn led the lock her up chants at the convention and otherwise. What is the reporting now on the chances that that sort of thing might happen to him?
I mean, I would say it's possible. It's definitely something that the Mueller team is looking at. I would be very surprised if we saw any kind of charges that involve simply failing to register as a foreign agent. If you look at the Manafort and Gates cases that were brought a little over a week ago, prosecutors in those cases said pretty much explicitly that there isn't really a history of bringing cases for failing to register as a foreign agent, except if you do something else, like you misrepresent yourself or you are involved in some conspiracy to present false information to the government, or you lie to investigators. That's the kind of thing that will then be coupled together with those other charges and put forward as a package. You really don't find cases where people simply fail failed to register, and there was some dispute, and they got charged over that.
Josh, is there reporting on whether he's cooperating or has been asked to cooperate?
We know that the prosecutors have been trying to get cooperation from the son and the father, but at this point, I can't tell you where that stands. There's no real indication. It certainly has been very quiet from the senior Flynn here over the last few months, although, as you pointed out, Shep, the son, Michael Flynn Jr., continues to taunt his opponents and his critics on Twitter.
Josh Gerstein, senior reporter for Politico. Josh, thanks.
Sure.
President Trump once accused China of ripping off the United States, but he had a very different tone during his visit to Beijing. Why the president is now saying China is not to blame for what he calls an unfair trade relationship with the United States. Who's to blame for that? Give you a few guesses. It's coming up. States in China is very one-sided and unfair, but he does not blame China. It's a big change from his campaign, a 180 from his campaign when he declared that China was raping the United States economy and committing one of the greatest thefts in the history of the world. And that's a quote. During a business event today in Beijing with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, President Trump instead pointed the finger at the American leaders who preceded him.
Who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit. But in actuality, I do blame past administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow.
According to a Washington Post reporter who was in attendance, there was a gasp from reporters when the president made those comments. Rich Edson's at the State Department with a reaction this afternoon. Rich?
Shep, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says that President Trump was a little tongue-in-cheek when he made that remark. However, he says there was a lot of truth to that. He says, how could you blame the Chinese, essentially, for taking advantage of the United States, as developing country China is, when the United States let China do so? However, when it comes to this administration's efforts to try to close that massive trade imbalance, more than $350 billion with China, Secretary Tillerson says the achievements thus far are pretty small and acknowledges there is still a lot of work to do. The Trump administration and its predecessors have long negotiated with China over that trade imbalance, along with China's currency, stealing trade secrets from American businesses, and giving U.S. businesses access to sell goods to Chinese consumers. On North Korea, officials say President Trump pushed the case to President Xi Jinping that China still accounts for 90% of the trade conducted with the Kim Jong-un regime. The Trump administration, though, has applauded China for its work thus far to isolate North Korea. Secretary Tillerson says China shared evidence that the campaign to isolate North Korea is creating some stress with North Korea's economy, some of their citizens, perhaps even some of their military structure, though they acknowledge that if this strategy is to work to pressure North Korea to at least stop testing nuclear weapons, stop testing ballistic missiles, and come to the negotiating table, that it will take time. Shep?
Thanks very much. Live at State Department, Rich Edson. In a rare show of force, the United States Navy is sending 3 aircraft carriers to the Pacific. And a defense official tells Fox News they're heading near the Korean Peninsula. The strike force is going to meet up in the Sea of Japan to do combat drills, surveillance, and other training. TSA workers did not find the majority of weapons hidden in luggage during an undercover Homeland Security operation. That's according to CBS News. It reports that investigators were able to sneak fake knives, fake guns, and even fake bombs past the TSA security more than 2/3 of the time. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, the Congressman Michael McCall of Texas, said he found that disturbing. The Homeland Security Department's Inspector General made recommendations to the TSA following this investigation. The TSA administrator said, "We take the findings very seriously and are implementing measures that will improve screening effectiveness at checkpoints. We are focused on staying ahead of that dynamic threat to aviation," which is exactly what they said about a year ago when they had another test and they failed it wildly as well. TSA. TripAdvisor is rolling out a new feature that flags hotels and restaurants where travelers have reported sexual assaults and other serious incidents. In those cases, you'll see a red warning like this one here. It'll be at the top of the page. The warning does not list the incidents. It simply instructs travelers to do more research before booking. A TripAdvisor spokesman tells the New York Times newspaper the badge will stay up for at least 3 months, and a committee will decide whether to add or remove one. This comes after some people say TripAdvisor removed reviews alleging sexual assault. Company reps say the comments were not always family friendly, and that TripAdvisor is making the comment guidelines more clear. A bit of a controversy at one of the biggest events in country music. As it turns out, the singer who won the top award of the night wasn't actually singing earlier in the show. What Garth Brooks is saying about that dust up right ahead. Country singer Garth Brooks getting lots of criticism for that performance or non-performance at the Country Music Awards last night. He admitted he was lip-syncing. At the same ceremony where he took home the top award, Entertainer of the Year, Garth Brooks blamed his busy touring schedule and said his voice just isn't going anywhere. Twitter didn't like it. Twitter never likes anything, does it?
No.
Lillian's here with details.
Andrew Hayes tweeted, 280 characters still aren't enough for me to accurately describe how upset I am that Garth Brooks is lip-syncing on the CMAs. That, of course, is referencing the fact that Twitter recently doubled the amount of stuff you can put in a tweet.
Yeah, sadly.
Some people were a little sarcastic. Garth Brooks is obviously the best country singer there is. Sounds the same live as he does recorded. Sean tweeted, did the CMA Awards give everyone Eclipse glasses so they couldn't tell Garth Brooks wasn't really singing? An interesting conspiracy theory. They did hand out eclipse glasses earlier in the show as part of a gag.
It's a total eclipse of the moon.
They said total eclipse of the Garth.
Of the Garth, okay.
At least one person was cutting him some slack. So maybe Garth had a sore throat. With everything else that's happening in the world, who cares if he lip-synced? I mean, the guy can truly sing. Ever seen him in concert? Wow.
Yeah, I don't care. It was great. The song's great. Yeah. I love that song.
And, you know, this is the 6th time he's won, and that's more than any other country singer. So,
insane.
Yeah,
he's good at this. His throat hurt. Give him a break.
12 shows in 10 days, he said. That's a lot.
Twitter gives no one a break.
They don't.
No. Cave-dwelling evils. Thank you. A self-driving bus in Las Vegas crashed just hours into its first day on the job. Oops. City officials say it's humans' fault. Police say the driverless shuttle came to a stop while a truck was trying to back out of an alley. The truck apparently continued to back up, its tires grazing the front of that bus. City officials said it was just a fender bender, and nobody got hurt. A man in Pennsylvania tried to get out his vote. Instead, he got hit with a DUI. This is the guy. Cops say he seemed wasted to them when he showed up to vote at an elementary school in Harrisburg. Not only that, it wasn't even the right day. This happened on Monday. We don't vote on Mondays. Well, that didn't take long. A little more than a month after walking out of a Nevada prison where he served 9 years for armed robbery, O.J. Simpson has reportedly gotten into more trouble. According to TMZ, which knows all, security guards kicked him out of the Cosmo Hotel in Las Vegas last night after he got very drunk and unruly. TMZ reports that O.J. was angry with the hotel staff. O.J. was reportedly nice to the security guards. Still, the hotel banned him forever. And we'll be right back. It's always Florida, isn't it? A woman there says she was out for a drive when she saw 3 bears roaming around her neighborhood. Altamont Springs, Florida, just north of Orlando. The woman said the cops would not remove the bears because they were in their natural habitat. In other words, the bears were there first. And on this day in 1965, one of the biggest power blackouts in U.S. history hit the Northeast. It hit at the height of rush hour, stranding people in elevators, on trains, even in the underground tunnels of New York subway system. Crews were able to get the power back by the next morning after the Northeast went dark 52 years ago today. Should news break out, we'll break in because breaking news changes everything on Fox News Channel. Your World with Neil Cavuto starts right now.